Ethan Blackwood woke before dawn to the muted glow of the city creeping through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. Below him, traffic hummed like a distant river, steady and indifferent. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, already tired. Sleep never lasted long anymore. His mind moved faster than rest allowed, numbers, meetings, contracts, acquisitions, all blending into a constant noise he couldn't switch off. By the time he stepped into the kitchen, dressed in a crisp shirt and tailored slacks, the smell of fresh coffee was already in the air. Everything was exactly where it should be. The counter shone. The newspaper lay folded neatly beside his tablet. Breakfast was prepared, simple and precise. This was the rhythm of his life, order without warmth. Sophia had been there for hours. She moved quietly, as she always did, wiping the counter once more even though it was already spotless. At 32, she carried herself with a calm that came from necessity, not ease. Her hair was tied back neatly, her uniform clean but worn from countless washes. She had learned long ago that being invisible made life easier. Invisible people weren't questioned. Invisible people weren't noticed when they were tired. Ethan barely looked up when he entered. "Morning," he said absently, scrolling through emails. "Good morning, sir," Sophia replied softly. Her voice had a gentleness to it that didn't quite fit the cold elegance of the penthouse. Ethan had heard it 1,000 times, yet it had never registered. To him, Sophia was part of the background, like the walls, the furniture, the silence. That morning, though, something was different. As Ethan poured his coffee, he noticed, vaguely, that Sophia was standing still near the kitchen table instead of moving on to her next task. Her phone lay in her hands, screen dark, fingers gripping it too tightly. Her shoulders were tense, as if she were holding herself together by force alone. He frowned slightly. "Is something wrong?" he asked, more out of mild curiosity than concern. Sophia startled, as if pulled from a deep place. "No, sir, I'm sorry. I was just taking my break." Ethan nodded, already losing interest. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his legal team. Another problem that required his attention. He felt irritation rise in his chest, sharp and familiar. "I'll be traveling tonight," he said, more to fill the silence than to inform her. "Back late tomorrow." "Yes, sir." He reached into his wallet without thinking and pulled out his sleek black credit card, the kind that didn't have limits most people could imagine. He placed it on the counter between them. "If anything comes up while I'm gone, use this," he said casually. "Groceries, maintenance, whatever you need. I don't want to be bothered with small things." Sophia stared at the card as if it were something dangerous. "Sir," she said slowly, "I don't think." "I trust you," Ethan interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "It's just money." The words landed harder than he intended, though he didn't notice. To him, money had always been simple. It solved problems. It created distance. It kept emotions manageable. He had grown up believing that as long as you had enough of it, nothing else really mattered. Sophia swallowed. Her throat felt tight. That single card represented more money than she earned in a year. Maybe more than she would ever see at once in her lifetime. "Thank you," she said quietly, lowering her eyes. Ethan grabbed his coat and keys, already mentally moving on to his next meeting. He didn't see the way her hands trembled as she picked up the card, didn't see the moisture gathering in her eyes. He didn't hear the shaky breath she released once he was gone. When the door closed behind him, the penthouse felt even larger than usual. The silence pressed down on Sophia, heavy and unforgiving. She stood alone in the kitchen, the credit card resting on the counter like a test she hadn't studied for. She thought of the folded papers hidden deep in her bag, the hospital bills she no longer opened because the numbers made her dizzy. She thought of the doctor's careful voice, the way it softened when delivering news that was anything but gentle. She thought of her son, Matteo, with his brave smile and tired eyes, asking her if he would be home for his birthday. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, phone back in her hands. There were 3 missed calls. The hospital again. Her chest tightened. She pressed her palm flat against the table, grounding herself. For years, she had survived by doing everything right, working long hours, saving every spare coin, never asking for help. Pride had been the one thing no one could take from her. But pride didn't buy time. She looked at the card again. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "It's just money." To him, maybe. To her, it was hope, and danger, wrapped in plastic. "I won't," she whispered to herself. "I won't." Yet even as she said it, she knew the truth. Time was running out. Matteo was running out. And she was a mother before she was anything else. With a shaky breath, Sophia reached out and picked up the card, her fingers curling around it as tears finally slipped free. In the quiet luxury of a life that was never meant for her, she made a choice that would change everything, one born not from greed, but from love and desperation intertwined. Ethan returned late the second evening, the city already drowned in neon and rain. His shoulders ached with the familiar weight of responsibility, and his mind replayed arguments from the boardroom as the elevator carried him upward. He expected the same quiet order waiting for him, lights dimmed just right, the air faintly scented with lemon cleaner, the reassuring emptiness that meant nothing in his world had changed. The doors opened, and at first glance, everything looked normal. Too normal. He stepped into the penthouse and loosened his tie, calling out without thinking. Sophia. No answer. He paused, listening. The silence felt thicker than usual, pressing against his ears. He walked farther inside, shoes echoing softly against the marble. That's when he noticed it. The kitchen counter was cleared except for one small, deliberate arrangement. His credit card lay centered on the stone, perfectly aligned. Beside it was a folded piece of paper. Something tightened in his chest. He picked up the note and unfolded it carefully, as if it might break. Thank you for trusting me. I used your card once. I hope you can forgive me. Ethan's jaw clenched. A dozen thoughts raced through his mind: anger, disbelief, irritation. He had been careless, naive. He pulled out his phone immediately, opening his banking app, bracing himself for the sting of betrayal. Jewelry, designer stores, luxury boutiques. That was what he expected to see, because that was the world he knew. Instead, there was only one charge. His breath caught. The name of the transaction stared back at him, stark and undeniable. A children's oncology center. The amount was staggering, the kind of number that made even him pause. His heart began to pound, not with rage, but with something far more unsettling. Confusion. He searched the apartment then, driven by an urge he couldn't explain. In the small drawer near the counter, he found an envelope tucked carefully out of sight. Inside were photocopied documents, medical reports filled with terminology he didn't fully understand, dates circled, notes scribbled in the margins. There was a photo slipped between the pages. A little boy lay in a hospital bed, thin but smiling, holding up two fingers in a peace sign. His eyes were unmistakable, Sophia's eyes. Ethan sank into a chair as the truth settled over him, heavy and inescapable. This hadn't been theft. It hadn't been carelessness or entitlement. It had been need, raw, terrifying need. A mother standing at the edge of losing the one thing that mattered more than rules, more than jobs, more than dignity. At the bottom of the last page, a few lines were written in neat, careful handwriting. My son needed time more than I needed honesty. If you want to fire me, I understand. I just wanted him to live. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. His life had been filled with transactions, hostile takeovers, settlements, strategic losses, but none of them had ever reached this far into his chest. Money had always obeyed him. It had never accused him before. He thought of how easily he had said, "It's just money." How lightly he had placed the card on the counter, never imagining what it could mean to someone else. The realization burned. That night, instead of calling his lawyer or his accountant, Ethan got back into his car and drove to the hospital listed on the receipt. The building was quieter than he expected, humming softly with late-night machines and whispered footsteps. He asked at the desk for Sophia, giving only her first name, unsure if he would even be allowed back. A nurse studied him briefly, then nodded and pointed down the hall. He found her standing beside a small bed, one hand resting gently on her son's arm. Mateo slept fitfully, his chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow. Sophia looked exhausted, hollowed out by weeks of fear. When she turned and saw Ethan, the color drained from her face. I'm sorry, she said immediately, panic flooding her voice. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. I'll pay you back, every dollar, I swear. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she spoke, shoulders trembling. She looked smaller than he had ever seen her, stripped of the quiet strength she carried at work. Ethan raised a hand, stopping her. His own voice betrayed him when he spoke. You don't owe me anything. She stared at him, disbelief cutting through her fear. Sir, you already paid more than I ever have, he said softly, glancing at the sleeping child. You paid with love. Sophia covered her mouth, a sob escaping before she could stop it. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Ethan arranged for the best specialists without hesitation, not as a favor, not as charity, but as something closer to responsibility. He covered every treatment, every medication, every night Sophia needed to stay close to her son. When she returned to the penthouse, it was no longer as a maid alone. Ethan set up a foundation in Mateo's name, quietly, without press releases or praise. He learned the boy's favorite stories, his favorite color, the way he laughed when he felt strong enough to laugh. And somewhere along the way, Ethan learned something else too, something no amount of money had ever taught him before. That wealth wasn't measured by what you could control. Sometimes, it was measured by what could finally break your heart open, and teach you how to feel again.